or 7 times, because that is why the power in those old hymns is huge. Unbelievable images that come right out of our reading this morning. Thank you, John. I'm not sure that you knew that when you picked it. It must be a God thing. All right, 2 stories from Mark. Mark purposely puts these 2 stories together. The first one, right? A woman coming to Jesus for healing for her daughter. Now, this story also shows up in Matthew, but there are some differences, and so I invite you to go home this afternoon and read the Matthew account and compare them and do your own kind of theological work. In Matthew, let me just say, it happens in a public place. This woman comes to him and throws herself at his feet, and the disciples get on Jesus' case and say, "Would you just send her away?" Matthew had his reasons for writing it his way. Mark has his reasons too. Here it happens inside a house. Now you have to know that where Jesus is in Mark's gospel is in a very Gentile area, a non-Jewish area. And it's in a fairly well-to-do non-Jewish Gentile area. And there he is in a house, which gives us some pretty important clues. He's in a Gentile home, right? Oh my goodness. Last week, remember we had that story about the Pharisees being angry that Jesus' disciples didn't follow the Jewish laws about washing their hands properly. This week, he's sitting inside a non-Jewish home, for heaven's sakes. Jesus has friends everywhere. His charisma, his presence, his teaching, something about Jesus has attracted a wide array of attention. But there he is inside the house where he had gone because he didn't want anyone to know where he was. You know, just a break, please, just a little time away. And Mark says, but he couldn't escape notice. We've talked often as we've looked at Mark about these crowds, right? How the crowds just press on him and follow him everywhere, even when he escapes across the Sea of Galilee by boat. And we've looked at the fact that they follow him because they want more of what he has to offer. More of that miracle of food, enough food for 5,000 people. More of those healings, more of that presence, more of those signs that give them hope. Well, here comes this well-to-do Gentile woman just pushing her way into the house. A pushy woman. I have to give a shout out to John Morris, our Episcopal friend from down at the church at Lake Maury. Lectionary group started again this past Wednesday, and that really is a great group where clergy get together and kind of dig around in Scripture. He told this great story because he suggested that we've got dueling proverbs going on between this woman and Jesus, and that maybe there's a twinkle in Jesus' eye as he spars with this woman, because he says, let the children be fed first, and she counters with, yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs. John made this analogy. You all know when families often gather for big events, there is the matriarch, the grandmother, right, in the kitchen, making sure that all the food comes out at the right time and looks good. And so it so happens that perhaps this one Thanksgiving, as the family gathers, the granddaughter brings home for this meal her Muslim boyfriend. And of course, family's a little nervous about that. And so this young man goes into the kitchen to help Grandma. Imagine that. And Grandma says, too many cooks spoiled the broth, you don't need to be here. And the young boyfriend says, many hands make light work. Dueling proverbs, right? And so, as John suggested, perhaps some of the resistance went down, and there was laughter, and a relationship with God. That's kind of how he thought maybe we should look at this encounter between Jesus and the woman, and I think it's an appropriate way. Note that there's already consternation among Jesus' followers. He went to the Gentiles? He went to those rich folks? Now he's healing this woman's daughter? That's our guy. What's he doing? Well, Mark then adds this other little story that Matthew doesn't have, and it's a story that isn't really about healing, although it is a healing story. We have a deaf man, which means what? Oh, cannot hear, right? With a speech impediment, which means, oh yeah, cannot speak clearly. And Mark says Jesus took him away from the crowd, and what were the words that he used in Aramaic? Be opened. Be open. Clearly, Mark is saying to his people and to us, do not presume to think that you know who's in and who's out. Do not presume to think that you know who's beloved and who isn't. Do not presume to think that you know the truth and those others don't. Like the grandmother and that granddaughter's boyfriend, it's always, always, always about relationships that bring life. So we look at James then. At one level, the reading from James is so obvious, right? No favoritism of any sort, he writes, especially not of rich folks over poor folks. And then he adds, God has a special place in God's heart for the poor. He says, if you commit partiality, you commit sin. He says, mercy triumphs over judgment. And my favorite line in that reading, you know, if a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says, oh, go in peace, be warm and eat your fill, but you don't do anything about it, what good is that? You gotta love James. Some of you know that yesterday Don Sinclair and Jen did this thing in town called Kids Busk. The idea of busking, where, you know, if you're in the subway station in New York, you take out your guitar and you open your case and you play, and the subway folks throw a couple quarters in your case. There was a 4-year-old little boy who strummed his guitar and sang a song. There was a 5-year-old little girl in a tutu who sang a hokey pokey and danced it. There was an 8-year-old who was very shy, right under a tree over on the VA lawn, who sang a Celtic song a cappella. Oh, her mama was so proud. There were 2 other girls, I think they were 9 and 10, on the steps of the Methodist Church, who sang Alouette, Gentil Alouette, and they were just adorable. There were 3 violin players. There was a magician. I hate magic because I can never figure out how that works. There was a 17-year-old from St. Johnsbury who sang an original ballad. There were 2 high school girls who sang solos. And then there were these 2 young boys breakdancing on the stage of the VA. My eyes teared up and my heart was really soft because these are our kids. These are this community's young people offering art, which we all know increases self-esteem and confidence. And here was the community throwing quarters and dollars in their cases and showing support. And it struck me that non-violent action for peace happened right over at the BA yesterday, right here in Bradford, on a Saturday afternoon in September. Maybe that wasn't world-changing, and yet maybe it was. Maybe those 14 young people will, through their art and the support of the community, maybe they'll change the world. And so I was thinking yesterday afternoon how contrasting that experience was with my experience at the council meeting Tuesday night. You may know that in order to keep showing movies, we have to have a license. If you show them in your home, it's okay, but to show them in a public setting, you need a license. And we can get one for $210 from the same company that we get our copying license from for music. And so we spent time talking a little about that, about the budget and about money. And instead of biting the bullet and saying, we'll find the money, because it's for outreach, it's for families in town who come into our vestry for a free movie one night a month. Instead of that, it was suggested we could do a fundraiser and put the money in the budget next year. And then there was a lot of talk about reinstating a semi-permanent nursery downstairs in the vestry, putting out carpet again, maybe painting the walls with colored shapes, getting some new toys, and it would stay there, except for when we need all the room in the vestry. It would stay there where anyone coming into the vestry would see a welcoming place for wee little ones. And someone suggested that we don't have enough little ones yet to do such a thing. Although someone else made this unbelievably creative suggestion and said, we could take out the back 5 pews and we could build 2 rooms in the back of the sanctuary right here on this floor, one for a cry room and a nursery, and one that would be a lovely new little parlor where we could have coffee. And then we talked about the budget itself. We passed a budget with a $13,500 deficit. We passed it as a congregation. The September cash flow report shows a $576 deficit with $6,100 in our checking account at the time. With a note that we haven't asked to borrow any money from the game supper funds, which stands at $11,000. I left the council meeting very sad Tuesday night after 2 years of my preaching about the teachings of Jesus, about taking risks and having faith and moving forward with faith, about generosity and extravagant hospitality. We spend most of our council meetings talking about money worries rather than ministry opportunities. Today's gospel from Jesus, according to Mark, says, be open, hear in new ways. James insists that we show no partiality, and here's what I think about that. We do a really good job as we gather on Sundays. I have never observed and can't imagine that any of us would show some kind of particular hospitality to some big name in town over against someone who no one knows at all. In fact, we keep trying new ways to accommodate Lonnie and Dennis. We've got an elevator. We can make large print copies of the bulletin to help those who are visually impaired. We keep working on the sound system to be sure everyone can hear everyone. But deeper down, there's this regular concern that hangs over all clergy. Beware of offending the big givers. And I believe Charlotte indicated that, in fact, one of our good givers did decrease their giving this year. I don't know if that has anything to do with me or if it only has to do with circumstances. Really, though, from this pastor's perspective, often for the church, and I hope and pray not for our church, how we use our money often reflects how deep is our willingness to trust God. We'll have about $63,000 in the Katrina Munn Fund after this fiscal year. We have over $250,000 in our funds, the report we got is that the average weekly gift is between $15 and $30. How bold it would be to change our sanctuary as per that creative suggestion, right? How bold to buy our own movie projector, not to mention the movie license, instead of borrowing from our gracious Methodist sisters and brothers. Would it be bold to buy new music for the choir? Will we continue to step out in risk, in faith, and keep trying new program ideas in reaching out and showing caring for our community, particularly those most in need? Or will we keep our ears and our hearts closed because, well, protecting is our basic posture rather than giving? James said it so clearly. If you show partiality, if your first priority is protection of the way things were, protection of our trust funds, fear and worry over the internal affairs rather than this expansive response to the external possibilities, if you show partiality, then you sin. That's what James said. I want that 5-year-old in her tutu dancing the hokey pokey right here in our sanctuary. I want Jesus to stick his fingers in our ears and touch our tongues. I want to be astounded beyond measure by what the Holy Spirit is doing in this community. So may it be.